This is pretty difficult to speak about, and it's ultimately not worth mentioning at all. Yet, despite that, there's still the proclivity to try to speak about it. It's just what's happening. So, bear with me here. See if you can follow where I'm going with this. It's in regards to non duality, no self, enlightenment, and how there's no path to it, no absolute method to make it happen, and no one to make it happen. There's a seeming paradox within this that I want to try to dissect, to peer into, to make as much sense of as one possibly could, just for fun. So, obviously, when it comes to non duality, there isn't ultimately a separate someone at the center of experience who becomes enlightened. Because there isn't anyone that can make enlightenment happen. And what I see a lot of, I just being this body here, this individual person, what I see a lot of is people that go through these spiritual practices, this intense seeking to try to find enlightenment, and then whenever a glimpse dawns upon them, they'll suddenly reject the spiritual practices, the methods, and such. And they'll feel the proclivity to go around and try to stop other people from spiritually seeking. And they'll say, it's hopeless. There's no one that can make it happen. So stop trying. You're just deceiving yourself. And this is such a funny, difficult thing to speak about because there's really no absolute position that anyone could stand in to say that this is absolutely how it should be. Because the irony is the typical individual that catches this recognition, this glimpse of enlightenment, in most cases that happens to be someone that was spiritually seeking, that was trying to make it happen. Someone being the particular individual body. In most cases, when enlightenment, when the undivided substratum dawns upon an individual, in most cases, that individual is someone that was doing these practices. And in their pursuit to try to find enlightenment, to try to recognize their true nature, in that pursuit, they may go through this phase where they reject the worldly things, the ordinary, mundane stuff. And then, ironically, they sort of flip-flop. And once they recognize enlightenment, they tend to push away the spiritual, mystical stuff and then go straight for the worldly, ordinary stuff. And this is just funny because it's truly all inclusive. So it's not really one or the other. It's equally appearing as everything. In a sense, everything becomes ordinary, including those spiritual, mystical practices. So what I'm really trying to get at here is just the irony of this flip-flopping. Because the ego, the sense that there is someone at the center of experience, that can, in a way, hijack the recognition of enlightenment and then take on a non-dual persona where it tries to shame other people for becoming invested in particular spiritual practices. It'll try to shut it down and just prevent anyone from seeking ever again because there is no one to do the seeking, so they see it as deception. They see it as misleading to give someone practices when there is no one there that can do the practice, that can make it happen. And to counter this, I mean, if you're saying there's no one to find enlightenment, there's no one to do the practice, then by that same token, there's no one to be deceived. So it's so funny to talk about, isn't it? There's no one to be deceived either. So what is the inclination to try to stop people from seeking? That's, I would suggest, even that is more of the ego, the sense of separateness, that's trying to appear as someone who is no longer under the conviction that there is a separate self and is trying to put down any seeking. It's I don't want to say it's a fake nobility. Maybe there's a good intention behind it. It can become an obsessive, compulsive response whenever one sees someone speaking as if there's a separate self, when they're using the conventional grammar of the English language, when they're saying things like I, me, you, they'll try to combat this language and act as if you suddenly can't speak that way because there's no self, and there's just no need for that. The truly ungraspable, positionless point of non-duality is that there is truly no should or shouldn't about it. And that includes spiritual seeking. Seeking might seem to happen. There might seem to be the conviction that there is a separate self who's trying to find enlightenment or engage in a practice. That might seem to happen, and it doesn't need to stop seeming to happen. And I would suggest that something is still being overlooked, which is fine, if one is trying to suppress the seeking from themselves or other individuals. If they're trying to shut it down, to say, no, stop seeking, it's just deception, there's no one to find it anyways. That sort of suppression of seeking is itself another form of seeking in disguise. It's a way of trying to implement the way that you now feel it should be because of this truth that you've heard or recognized. You're trying to make it a practical implication, and it's just not practical. Non-duality doesn't aim to change anything in itself. It's not supposed to make the way that things appear any particular way. So if seeking seems to happen, that's just as equally what is as not seeking. There's really no difference. So this is such a funny thing to talk about because I'm not even saying it to try to get people to stop suppressing the spiritual seeking. Again, that's just what seems to be happening. I suppose I'm just pointing out the humor in it. You reach a point where there's just nothing more that you could say about it. And you see it's ultimately not worth mentioning anyways. So all you can do is just laugh at it. Not as a mocking sort of, haha, what a fool. Not that way, just, it's so ungraspable. It's so ironic. There's just nothing you could say about it. It just intrinsically is itself. And you can't really translate it with any precision. There's really no fixed position to be in.